All right, welcome back. This is the third video in our series about materials parsimony, the first biosphere rule. And last video we talked about the challenges of materials proliferation and how that too much of a good thing is forcing companies to evaluate more closely the materials choices they are making for their production. And in this video, we're going to talk about a tool or perhaps a strategy that is helping companies do that. And in the process of helping them manage the sort of the risks around the materials choices, it is actually leading us towards greater materials parsimony. And that tool is called green screening. And so green screening is an approach, a systematic way for a company to screen or evaluate its materials choices in order to eliminate risks that arise from human health challenges or environmental toxicology challenges. And there's a wide variety of these. And a good example of a relatively straightforward or perhaps simple green screen would be H&M, the Swedish clothing manufacturer. Back in the 1990s, H&M was confronting some new regulations in Germany, and the German government began regulating dyes. They're called azo dyes. It's not necessarily important, but in the manufacture of clothing, H&M used a lot of synthetic fibers, natural and synthetic fibers to make the clothes, and then a number of different dyes to provide the color. And so once the government started doing this called the attention of management, and they said, hey, we should probably take a closer look and be a little bit more systematic about this. And so what they did is they started looking for something to guide them on how should they evaluate or deal with the risks associated with their materials choices, because it appeared to H&M that regulations were trailing way behind the ability of industrial companies to produce new chemicals, and it became incumbent on H&M as a responsible manufacturer to understand and control those risks that come with new materials. And they were looking for something to guide themselves, and they honed in on what is known as the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is something that comes out of international law, and basically what it says is the indication of risk, not proof, is all you need to drive a decision, right? We don't have to wait till there's a smoking gun. If there's an indication of risk, it's incumbent on us to take precautionary action to ensure that that risk doesn't come to fruition. And that works really well with chemicals, right? Because there may be an indication of risk, but it takes a very long time and a lot of money and a lot of lab work to prove that a chemical is actually toxic. If you just think about cigarettes, how long it took for us to prove that cigarettes actually caused cancer. So the precautionary principle says you don't wait till people are getting cancer from your product. You take action ahead of time if there's any kind of indication. And so this then guided 3M, and what they did then is began looking around the world, looked at all of the different countries and found what was the highest standard in every country, and the highest standard in that country then became the highest standard, global standard. So what 3M is, they identified the toughest regulations in every part of the world and applied that to their company globally. They also began speaking with researchers and think tanks to try to understand what these risk chemicals are. And today what they have is this document known as the H&M chemical restrictions. And what it really is just a list of chemicals that the company shares with its suppliers and with its contractors and says, you can't use any of these chemicals in the production of the products that we're going to put on the shelves and our customers are going to buy in the store. So, and I think there's around 380 or something restricted chemicals on that list, and the company goes back every 2 or 3 years and revamps the list. Right? So that's a pretty straightforward approach. What are the concerns in academia, in laboratories, and in government agencies around the world around these different chemicals? And let's be proactive. Let's be precautionary and get them out of our products ahead of schedule so we don't discover the problem or cause harm to our customers or the employees working in our contractors or suppliers. Right? Straightforward. That's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum are very sophisticated protocols that systematically go through and evaluate all of the materials in your product down to the cast level. The cast level is sort of the fundamental, it's called the chemical abstract standards, but it's the number, it's the sort of the smallest unit of a chemical and the standard we use. And so you try to evaluate down to the smallest chemical. And a leader in this, an early leader of this was Michael Bromgard. Michael Bromgard, obviously one of the founders of MBDC, McDonough Bromgard Design Consultancy. Michael Bromgard's nonprofit in Europe is EPEA, the Environmental Protection Encouragement Agency. And back in the 80s, this is a really famous case study that most people know about. Climatex, this was a fabric being produced by a textile manufacturing company in Switzerland known as Roner Textile. And they wanted to actually create a sustainable product. They wanted to create a textile that was safe enough that you could throw it into the garden and have it break down and be compost and be absolutely safe. So they began working with the EPEA using their protocol to evaluate all of the chemicals systematically that were going to go into these textiles. And this is basically what the protocol does. It evaluates everything down to a really fine-grained level and puts those chemicals in different categories. And it's sort of a stoplight, right? Green is good, red is don't use it, orange is that we don't have enough information. And then you systematically select the green materials for the production of your products. If they're available, if not, you use yellow. But you use that to guide what materials go into your product. And that was the process that was used by the EPEA team when they were doing this materials assessment for Roner and Climatex. The problem is getting access to that information is really hard, right? There is some standard information that chemical and materials producers need to share with people. Here in the United States, it's known as the MSDS, the Materials Safety Data Sheet. Really what this is, though, is it's not detailed enough for you to do the type of analysis that the EPEA was hoping to do here. This is actually just, you want to make sure that if your employees are using this, they don't cause an explosion, they don't get burned by acid, toxic vapors don't attack their nasal passageways, so that you put the right health and safety equipment on, not necessarily that you understand and know the material makeup and the potential risks of these chemicals. So this is the information that's provided. It's woefully inaccurate for the type of analysis, for the type of green screening that EPEA wanted to do. So, and then there are more reasons why it's hard to get this information. Part of it also has to do with the structure of these supply chains. They're very complex, these chemical manufacturing and materials manufacturing supply chains. If you're a company, you might ask your immediate tier 2 suppliers to, well, can you tell me what's in what the chemical makeup of these materials you're selling me are? They might have a problem, though, because they might not know everything in it because that's controlled by their tier 3 suppliers. And the tier 3 suppliers may not know because it's controlled by the tier 4 suppliers. So it's very hard to get information, and these individual suppliers are loath to share that information with their customer because it's the secret sauce, right? Their formulation is their trade secret. It's like, a company asking Coca-Cola, tell me, Coca-Cola, what the secret recipe for Coca-Cola is. They don't want to give that information away for a number of reasons. One, they don't want people to be able to copy their formulation. The other, if you tell your customer what is in it, your customer can backwards engineer your production process, figure out what your prices are, and actually try to negotiate your margin down, right? So there's a whole bunch of structural reasons why companies don't want to share this information. And in order to get this information, it required some innovative approach. It required a third party. And this is an example of what some of these production systems look like. What you basically do is the supplier provides information to a third party, and then the third party takes that information and runs it through their protocol, their green screen, right? And then the materials information goes into a materials database, and instead of telling you all the formulation of that material, it tells you, is that material a green material, is it a yellow material, or is it a red material? and then that information will be shared with the customer, the producer. So it puts a third party, an intermediary between the customer that's going to use the information and the supplier who doesn't want to give that information away. And then if you want, the information about which chemicals are green and which ones are red can be then shared back with the supplier, and the supplier can say, hey, these are red chemicals. Maybe you should rethink this, and maybe you can innovate around it and be able to reduce the toxicity. So it's a nice process here. And it is a way to provide the information to the customer. The problem a lot of people have is this becomes a black box, right? There's a black box in here in this protocol that neither the supplier or the customer has access to. And so you don't know what's going on in there, and the supplier might be upset that, hey, why are you guys eliminating my chemical? And I can't know why you're eliminating my chemical, and vice versa. So, but this is an approach that allows these green screens to get down to the very fine-grained CAS level in a way that protects the secrecy of these different manufacturers, right? And it's been relatively successful, and you have a number of these green screens, and you have a number of third-party green screens, and you also have companies doing it. When I wrote my book, or think about a decade ago, there were very few of these. But now you have a number of these, and basically you can see, this is a nice example of it. Your materials come in, and some pass through to the green zone, and others are screened out. So you're beginning to see this. A number of companies have their own. SC Johnson has its green list, which has a trademark around that, but it's using a similar type of approach. So these have become common. Now, what's interesting is, yes, they help reduce the environmental and human health risks, but what a lot of people miss when they look at these is the implications for materials parsimony that this process, these green screens, have had. So we'll come back to the Climatex. This Climatex is a great case because it was one of the first, and they were very successful. They were able to produce this fabric that's so environmentally responsible that you can actually eat it. Probably doesn't taste very good, but it's not going to harm you because there's nothing hazardous or toxic in it. So it can actually be recycled. It can be thrown into a compost bin and allowed to break down, and then it becomes food for the next crop of plants, right? Your next cotton crop or something for the next fiber. So it facilitated a bio-based closed-loop system. What people missed, though, was what happened behind the scenes in this green screening process. So let me just show you here what this looks like. This is the green screening process, and EPEA got information from Ciba-Geigy, which was a Swiss dye manufacturer, about the makeup of their dyes. They had 1,600 chemical dyes in their production process. The data about those 1,600 dyes were passed through this material screen. And on the other end, only 16 dyes came out as green dyes. Now this is the amazing thing. That screening process, just for human health and ecotoxicology, eliminated 99% of Ciba-Geigy's portfolio of dyes, of chemical dyes. Now this was great for Rona because with those 16 dyes, they could make all the colors they needed for their textiles except black. So it didn't affect their ability to manufacture, but it eliminated a huge percentage of the Ciba-Geigy chemical dye portfolio. And on the other end, it produced a radically parsimonious set of manufacturing dyes that were available to 3M. Not a lot of people when you talk about this case, no one pays attention to that. Radical ability to create a far more parsimonious materials palette through this process than otherwise existed. And so in the next videos, we'll see that this is not an isolated case. True Textiles, another one, they passed 380 chemicals through their process and came up with 30 final chemicals that actually passed through and were actually considered, whatever their standard was, green for their process. So this is an important first step, and one of the interesting things is doing this solely for human health and ecotoxicology, you actually make a lucky step towards materials parsimony, something we'll talk about now in the next steps. I mean, it's important for materials parsimony to get the nasty chemicals out of your material supply. But that's just the first step and the first important element of this materials parsimony biosphere rule number 1.